The most mysterious wars in history. What if I told you that some of the deadliest wars in human history were fought for reasons that nobody fully understands? That thousands, sometimes millions of people died in conflicts so strange, so bizarre, so utterly unexplainable that even centuries later, historians sit around conference tables arguing about what actually happened and why? We're not talking about World War II. We're not talking about Vietnam. Those wars, as horrific as they were, at least make a kind of terrible sense when you study them. No. What we're about to dive into is something far more unsettling. Wars where the causes evaporated into myth. Wars where entire armies vanished without explanation. Wars that may not have even happened the way we think they did, if they happened at all. Wars so drenched in secrecy, ritual, and madness that the truth might be stranger than anything a fiction writer could dream up. So settle in. Turn off the lights if you dare. Because once you go down this rabbit hole, you're never going to look at human conflict the same way again. Let's start with something that should shake you to your core. In the heart of medieval France, during a time when the Catholic Church held more power than any king or emperor, a war was launched not against a foreign enemy, not against an invading army, but against Christian. Brutality involved would make even the most hardened war veteran flinch. The Albigensian Crusade, launched in 1209, is one of the most disturbing and mysterious conflicts in European history. On the surface, it was a religious war. Pope Innocent III called for a crusade against the Cathars, a religious group living in the Languedoc region of southern France. The Cathars believed in a dualistic universe, a world where good and evil were equally powerful forces. They rejected the material world as inherently corrupt. They rejected the authority of the Pope. They rejected the sacraments. And perhaps most dangerously of all, they rejected the Church's monopoly on spiritual truth. But here's where the mystery begins. The Cathars weren't a military threat. They weren't raising armies. They weren't plotting to overthrow Rome. They were farmers, weavers, merchants, and minor nobles living peacefully alongside their Catholic neighbors. Many Catholic lords in the region actually protected them, not because they shared their beliefs, but because the Cathars were good people. Quiet, hardworking, honest. The kind of neighbors you'd want. So why did the Pope call for their complete and total annihilation? The official answer is heresy. The Cathars were heretics, and heresy had to be stamped out. But historians have spent centuries peeling back the layers of this explanation, and what they found underneath is far more complex and far more sinister. The Languedoc region was wealthy. Incredibly wealthy. It was a center of trade, culture, and learning. The local nobility operated with a degree of independence that made the French crown and the papacy deeply uncomfortable. Some scholars argue that the Albigensian Crusade wasn't really about religion at all. It was about power. It was about land. It was about crushing a region that had grown too independent, too tolerant, and too rich. The most chilling moment of the entire crusade came at the siege of Béziers in 1209. When the crusading army arrived at the city gates, they faced a problem. The city contained both Cathars and Catholics living side by side. How were the soldiers supposed to tell them apart? According to a contemporary account, the papal legate Arnaud Amalric was asked this very question. His alleged response has echoed through history like a scream in a cathedral. Kill them all. God will know his own. Whether or not he actually said those exact words is debated. But what isn't debated is what happened next. The Crusaders stormed the city and massacred virtually everyone inside. Men, women, children, Catholic and Cathar alike. Estimates range from 7,000 to 20,000 dead in a single day. People who sought refuge in the churches were butchered where they knelt in prayer. And this was just the beginning. The crusade lasted 20 years. 20 years of siege warfare, mass burnings, and systematic destruction of an entire culture. The Inquisition followed, rooting out any remaining Cathars with torture and execution. By the time it was over, the Languedoc region was devastated, its independence shattered, its unique culture erased. But the deepest mystery of the Albigensian Crusade isn't the political maneuvering or even the brutality. It's what the Cathars actually believed and what they might have possessed. Persistent legends claim that the Cathars guarded a great treasure, something so valuable and so dangerous that the church would stop at nothing to seize it. Some say it was a collection of sacred texts that contradicted church doctrine. Others claim it was the Holy Grail itself. When the last Cathar fortress of Montségur fell in 1244, 4 Cathars reportedly escaped under cover of darkness the night before the mass burning, carrying something with them. Something that has never been found. What was it? Nobody knows. And that mystery, that tantalizing gap in the historical record, has haunted researchers for nearly 800 years. Now let's cross the world and move forward in time to a war so strange that even the people who fought in it couldn't fully explain what had happened. The Taiping Rebellion, which raged across China from 1850 to 1864, is the deadliest civil war in human history. Let that sink in for a moment. Not one of the deadliest. The deadliest. Estimates of the death toll range from 20 million to 70 million people. To put that in perspective, that's potentially more deaths than World War I. And it was all started by one man who believed he was the brother of Jesus Christ. Hong Xiuquan was a failed civil servant who suffered a nervous breakdown after repeatedly failing the imperial examinations. During his breakdown, he experienced vivid visions that he later interpreted through the lens of Christian missionary pamphlets he'd received years earlier. He became convinced that he was the Son of God, the younger brother of Jesus, sent to earth to establish a heavenly kingdom and destroy the demons that had taken over China. And somehow, against all logic and reason, millions of people believed him. Hong built a massive movement called the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. It was part religious cult, part revolutionary army, part utopian social experiment. The Taiping imposed strict codes of behavior. They banned opium, alcohol, gambling, and prostitution. They advocated for equality between men and women, centuries before such ideas gained traction in the West. They redistributed land. They created a new calendar. They attempted to build what they believed would be heaven on earth. But heaven, as it turned out, was built on a foundation of blood. The Taiping armies swept across southern China with terrifying speed and ferocity. They captured Nanjing, one of China's greatest cities, and made it their capital. For over a decade, China was effectively split in two, with the Qing dynasty controlling the north and the Taiping controlling a massive swath of the south. The war that followed was apocalyptic. Entire cities were depopulated. Provinces that had been home to millions were reduced to wastelands. The fighting was brutal, with massacres committed by both sides on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. When Qing forces finally recaptured Nanjing in 1864, they slaughtered over 100,000 people. But here's what makes the Taiping Rebellion truly mysterious. How did it happen? How did a mentally unstable man with a garbled understanding of Christianity manage to raise an army of millions and nearly overthrow one of the most powerful empires on earth? The standard explanations point to widespread poverty, corruption, and dissatisfaction with the Qing dynasty. And those factors certainly played a role. But they don't fully explain the almost supernatural devotion that Hong's followers showed. These weren't mercenaries fighting for pay. They were true believers. They went into battle singing hymns, convinced that God was on their side, convinced that death in service of the heavenly kingdom would earn them eternal rewards. There's another mystery buried within the Taiping Rebellion that rarely gets discussed. Hong Xiuquan himself became increasingly reclusive as the war progressed. He retreated into his palace in Nanjing, surrounded by a harem of concubines, issuing increasingly bizarre and incoherent decrees. He spoke of visions, of conversations with God the Father, of heavenly battles being fought in parallel to the earthly ones. Some historians believe he suffered from a severe mental illness that worsened over time. Others have suggested that he was deliberately isolated and manipulated by his inner circle, who used his divine authority to maintain their own power. When the end came, Hong died under mysterious circumstances. The official story is that he poisoned himself as Qing forces closed in. But some accounts suggest he died of illness, possibly from eating wild vegetables during the siege of Nanjing. His body was reportedly exhumed by Qing soldiers, who burned it and fired his ashes from a cannon to prevent his followers from creating a shrine. Even in death, the authorities feared his power. The Taiping Rebellion left scars on China that lasted for generations. Entire regions didn't recover their pre-war population levels until the 20th century. And yet, despite being one of the most catastrophic events in human history, it remains relatively unknown outside of China. Ask the average person about the deadliest war of the 19th century, and they'll probably say the American Civil War, which killed roughly 620,000 people. The Taiping Rebellion killed at least 30 times that many, possibly more than 100 times. It's a war of almost incomprehensible scale, born from one man's delusion of divine parentage. And we're just getting started. Let's travel now to a war that might not have happened at all. Or rather, a war where the trigger, the very event that started the killing, was almost certainly a lie. In August 1964, the United States government announced that North Vietnamese patrol boats had attacked American destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. This incident, known as the Gulf of Tonkin Incident, was used to justify the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave President Lyndon Johnson broad authority to escalate American military involvement in Vietnam. It was, in effect, the event that launched the Vietnam War as we know it. There's just one problem. The second attack, the one that truly galvanized congressional support for the resolution, almost certainly never happened. Now, let me be clear. There was a first incident on August 2, 1964, when North Vietnamese torpedo boats did fire on the USS Maddox. That's well documented. But the second incident, on August 4, the one that was presented as clear evidence of North Vietnamese aggression, the one that tipped the scales, was based on confused radar readings, jittery sailors, and what appears to have been deliberate misrepresentation by senior military and political officials. The sailors aboard the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy reported seeing torpedo wakes and enemy vessels on their radar. They fired into the darkness for hours. But when the smoke cleared, there was no wreckage. No bodies. No evidence that any North Vietnamese boats had been there at all. Captain John Herrick, the commander of the task force, sent a cable back to Washington expressing serious doubts about whether the attack had actually occurred. He recommended a thorough investigation before any action was taken. His recommendation was ignored. President Johnson went on television that very night to announce retaliatory strikes against North Vietnam. 3 days later, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution with virtually no opposition. Only 2 senators voted against it. The war escalated rapidly from that point, eventually consuming over 58,000 American lives and an estimated 2 to 3 million Vietnamese lives. Decades later, the truth began to emerge. In 2005, declassified NSA documents revealed that intelligence had been deliberately manipulated to support the narrative of a second attack. Key reports were altered. Contradictory evidence was suppressed. The Johnson administration had been looking for a pretext to escalate, and the Gulf of Tonkin gave them exactly what they needed, whether it was real or not. This raises a question so profound and so disturbing that it's almost painful to contemplate. How many wars throughout history were started by events that never actually happened? How many millions of people have died because of lies told by the powerful to justify violence they'd already decided to commit? The Gulf of Tonkin isn't unique. It's part of a pattern that stretches back through history, a pattern of manufactured provocations, false flags, and deliberate deceptions used to drag nations into wars that serve the interests of the few at the expense of the many. And that pattern is one of the deepest and most unsettling mysteries of human conflict. Speaking of false pretenses and shadowy motivations, let's go back even further in time. Let's talk about a war that was supposedly fought over a bucket. Yes, a bucket. The War of the Oaken Bucket took place in 1325 between the Italian city-states of Bologna and Medina. According to legend, soldiers from Medina raided Bologna and stole a wooden bucket from a well in the city center. Bologna demanded its return. Medina refused. And so, naturally, the two cities went to war, culminating in the Battle of Zappolino, where an estimated 30,000 soldiers clashed on the battlefield and thousands died. Over a bucket. Except, of course, it wasn't really about the bucket. The bucket was a trophy, a symbol of the deeper conflict between the Guelphs, who supported the Pope, and the Ghibellines, who supported the Holy Roman Emperor. Bologna was Guelph. Medina was Ghibelline. The two factions had been at each other's throats for generations, and the stolen bucket was simply the spark that ignited a powder keg that had been building for decades. But here's the truly mysterious part. The deeper you dig into the Guelph-Ghibelline conflict, the less sense it makes. By the early 14th century, the original issues that had divided the two factions were largely irrelevant. The Holy Roman Empire was in decline. The papacy was about to enter the chaos of the Avignon period. The ideological basis for the conflict had evaporated. And yet the fighting continued, city against city, neighborhood against neighborhood, family against family, driven by grudges, vendettas, and a cycle of violence that had taken on a life of its own. In many ways, the War of the Oaken Bucket is a perfect microcosm of one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Why do we keep fighting even when we've forgotten what we're fighting about? Why do conflicts persist long after their original causes have disappeared? It's a question that has no easy answer, and it's one that resonates disturbingly with conflicts happening around the world right now. But that bucket? It's still in Medina. They never gave it back. You can see it in the Ghirlandina Tower to this day. A wooden bucket in a museum, surrounded by tourists who snap photos and chuckle at the absurdity of it all, never quite grasping the depths of the human tragedy it represents. Now let's shift our attention to one of the most enigmatic military events in ancient history. Something so strange that it's been debated by scholars, explorers, and adventurers for over 2,000 years. In 524 BC, the Persian Emperor Cambyses II sent an army of 50,000 soldiers across the Egyptian desert to destroy the oracle of Ammonius at the Siwa oasis. The oracle had supposedly insulted Cambyses, and the Persian king was not the kind of man who took insults lightly. He'd already conquered Egypt itself, and his army was the most powerful military force in the known world. Sending 50,000 men to punish a remote desert oracle was, in Cambyses' mind, a perfectly proportional response. The army set out from Thebes and marched west into the desert. They were seen by witnesses at the oasis of El Karga, about halfway to their destination. And then, according to the ancient historian Herodotus, they vanished. 50,000 soldiers. Gone. Swallowed by the desert. Herodotus reported that a massive sandstorm engulfed the army and buried them alive. It's a dramatic image, and it's not entirely implausible. The Sahara is capable of producing storms of terrifying intensity. But the complete disappearance of 50,000 men, along with their supplies, their animals, and all their equipment, stretches credulity. Even a catastrophic sandstorm would leave traces. Bodies. Equipment. Something. And yet, for over 2 millennia, nothing was found. In 2009, a pair of Italian archaeologists claimed to have discovered the remains of the lost army in a remote area of the Egyptian desert. They reported finding bronze weapons, jewelry, and human bones scattered across a wide area, consistent with an army overwhelmed by a sudden sandstorm. But their findings were disputed by Egyptian authorities and other scholars, and the mystery remains officially unsolved. Some alternative theories have emerged over the years. One suggests that the army never existed in the first place, that Herodotus fabricated or exaggerated the story. But Herodotus, while sometimes unreliable, generally based his accounts on oral histories and local traditions, and the story of the lost army was widely known in Egypt during his time. Another theory suggests that the army was ambushed and destroyed by local tribes, with the sandstorm story serving as a face-saving explanation for the Persians. A third theory, more radical still, suggests that the army deserted en masse, with the soldiers scattering into the desert to start new lives rather than carry out a mission they considered pointless or sacrilegious. Whatever the truth, the Lost Army of Cambyses represents one of history's great military enigmas. 50,000 people don't just disappear. And yet, in the vastness of the Sahara, perhaps they can. The desert keeps its secrets well. It has been keeping this one for 2,500 years, and it may keep it forever. Let's stay in the ancient world for a moment, because there's another war from this era that defies conventional explanation. The Bronze Age collapse, which occurred around 1200 BC, wasn't a single war. It was a cascade of catastrophes that destroyed virtually every major civilization in the eastern Mediterranean within a span of about 50 years. The Hittite Empire, which had dominated Anatolia for centuries, was obliterated. The Mycenaean Greek kingdoms, the world of Agamemnon and Odysseus, collapsed into a dark age that would last for centuries. The Egyptian New Kingdom, the most powerful state in the region, was severely weakened and never recovered its former glory. Cities across the Levant were burned to the ground. Trade networks that had connected the entire Mediterranean world were severed. It was, in many ways, the worst catastrophe in human history prior to the modern era. And nobody knows exactly what caused it. The most common explanation involves the Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of raiders who attacked the eastern Mediterranean from an unknown origin. Egyptian records describe them in dramatic terms, depicting great naval battles and desperate last stands. But who were the Sea Peoples? Where did they come from? The Egyptians listed their names, Peleset, Jeker, Shikalesh, Denyen, Weshish, but these names have proven maddeningly difficult to match with known historical groups. Some scholars have linked the Peleset to the Philistines and the Shikalesh to the Sicilians, but these identifications are tentative at best. More importantly, the Sea Peoples alone can't explain the totality of the Bronze Age collapse. This wasn't just a case of raiders attacking coastal cities. Inland empires fell too. The Hittites were a great land power, and they were destroyed not just by external invasion but by internal rebellion, famine, and the breakdown of their administrative system. Something deeper was happening, something systemic. Modern scholars have proposed a range of contributing factors. Climate change, with evidence of severe drought affecting the entire region. Earthquakes, with geological evidence of a series of devastating tremors along the major fault lines. Disruption of the tin trade, which would have crippled bronze production and undermined the military and economic foundations of every major power. Internal social upheaval, with evidence of rebellions and class conflict in several of the affected civilizations. But here's the truly mysterious part. Each of these factors alone would have been survivable. These were sophisticated, resilient civilizations that had weathered crises before. What made the Bronze Age collapse so total and so devastating was that all of these factors hit simultaneously, creating a cascading failure that no single society could withstand. It was, in modern terms, a systems collapse, a situation where the interconnections between civilizations that normally provided stability and resilience instead became channels through which disaster propagated. The Bronze Age collapse is a warning from history. It tells us that even the most powerful and sophisticated civilizations can fall, and fall quickly, when the right combination of pressures converges at the right moment. And the fact that we still don't fully understand what happened 3,000 years ago should give us pause. If it could happen then, could it happen again? Let's move forward in time to another conflict shrouded in mystery, one that took place in the jungles of Southeast Asia long before the Vietnam War brought that region to Western attention. The Khmer Empire, builders of the legendary Angkor Wat, was one of the most powerful and sophisticated civilizations in Asian history. At its peak in the 12th and 13th centuries, the empire controlled most of mainland Southeast Asia, and its capital at Angkor was one of the largest cities in the world, with a population estimated at up to 1 million people. The temples they built are among the most impressive architectural achievements in human history, and they remain a source of wonder and pilgrimage to this day. And then the Khmer Empire fell. And nobody is entirely sure why. The traditional narrative points to a series of wars with the Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya. The Thais sacked Angkor in 1431, and the Khmer capital was subsequently moved to Phnom Penh. End of story. Except that this explanation, while partly true, is deeply unsatisfying. The Khmer had faced Thai invasions before and survived. They had one of the most sophisticated water management systems in the ancient world, a network of reservoirs, canals, and barrays that sustained their massive population through the dry season. They had a powerful army, a complex bureaucracy, and centuries of accumulated wealth and knowledge. How could a single military defeat bring all of that crashing down? Recent research has revealed a much more complex and much more mysterious picture. Environmental studies show that the Angkor region experienced severe droughts in the 14th and 15th centuries, interspersed with periods of extreme flooding. The elaborate water management system that had been the foundation of Khmer prosperity began to fail, not because of poor engineering, but because the climate had shifted in ways that the system wasn't designed to handle. Sediment cores from the reservoirs show evidence of massive flooding followed by prolonged dry spells, a pattern that would have been catastrophic for rice agriculture. But there are other factors too. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Khmer elite may have converted from Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism in the century before the fall, a religious shift that would have undermined the divine authority of the king and the entire social hierarchy that the empire was built upon. There's evidence of internal conflict, of factions within the court fighting for control as the empire weakened. And there's the mystery of Angkor's abandonment itself. The city wasn't destroyed. It wasn't burned to the ground. It was simply abandoned, gradually, over a period of decades, as people drifted away to other cities and other lives. Walking through the ruins of Angkor today, with the jungle slowly reclaiming the temples, pulling apart the stones with the patient, inexorable force of roots and vines, you can feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on you. 1 million people lived here. They built wonders that still take your breath away. And then they left, and the jungle swallowed everything. What happened here? What went so wrong that a civilization this powerful, this creative, this magnificent, simply ceased to exist? We don't have a definitive answer. We may never have one. The jungle keeps its secrets almost as well as the desert. Now let's turn to a war that's mysterious not because of what caused it, but because of what happened during it. A war where the supernatural and the military collided in ways that have never been satisfactorily explained. During World War I, the Gallipoli campaign of 1915 saw British, Australian, New Zealand, and French forces attempt to seize the Dardanelles Strait from the Ottoman Empire. The campaign was a disaster, resulting in hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. But one incident from the campaign has achieved a special status in the annals of military mystery. On August 12, 1915, during the Battle of Chunuk-Bair, the 1st/5th Norfolk Regiment, a battalion of around 267 men, advanced into battle and was never seen again. According to witnesses, the battalion marched into a strange, low-hanging cloud that was sitting on the battlefield despite clear weather elsewhere. The cloud seemed to glow with an odd internal light. The soldiers marched into it, and when the cloud finally lifted or drifted away, the battalion had vanished. No bodies. No equipment. No sign that they had ever been there. After the war, when the British demanded an accounting of their missing soldiers, the Turkish authorities denied any knowledge of the battalion's fate. They hadn't been captured. They hadn't been buried. They had simply disappeared. Now, the rational explanation is that the men were killed in the confusion of battle and their bodies were either buried by Turkish soldiers or lost in the rugged terrain. Battlefield disappearances, while rare, are not unheard of, especially in the chaos of World War I. But the eyewitness accounts of the mysterious cloud, the strange light, and the apparently instantaneous disappearance of an entire battalion have fueled speculation for over a century. Some researchers have suggested that the witnesses were describing an unusual meteorological phenomenon, perhaps a form of fog or mist that was common in the Gallipoli Peninsula. Others have pointed out that the eyewitness accounts were recorded years or even decades after the event, raising questions about the reliability of memory. The most famous account comes from a statement made by members of a New Zealand field company in 1965, 50 years after the event, and some details in their account don't match the known facts. But the story persists. It has become part of the mythology of Gallipoli, a campaign that was already steeped in tragedy and myth. And it raises an unsettling question that applies to all wars. How many soldiers have simply vanished, their fates unknown, their stories untold, lost not to supernatural forces but to the vast, grinding, indifferent machinery of war? The answer is, far more than we'd like to think. Let's stay in the 20th century and examine another conflict that bristles with unanswered questions. The Falklands War of 1982, while well documented in many respects, contains episodes that remain deeply puzzling to military analysts and historians. But actually, let's go somewhere even stranger. Let's talk about the football war. In 1969, El Salvador and Honduras went to war. The conflict lasted only 4 days, but it killed approximately 3,000 people and displaced over 300,000 more. And while the name Football War suggests that the conflict was triggered by a soccer match, the reality is far more complex and far more mysterious than that simple explanation implies. Yes, the war did coincide with a series of World Cup qualifying matches between the two countries. And yes, there was significant violence surrounding those matches. A Honduran fan committed suicide after her country's defeat, and her funeral became a national spectacle that inflamed anti-Salvadoran sentiment. But the football matches were merely the spark. The kindling had been building for years. The real causes of the football war involved land reform, immigration, economic inequality, and the shadowy influence of powerful agricultural interests in both countries. By the late 1960s, approximately 300,000 Salvadoran immigrants were living in Honduras, many of them working as farmers on land that Honduran peasants felt should rightfully be theirs. When Honduras implemented an agrarian reform law that targeted foreign landowners, thousands of Salvadoran families were expelled, often violently. The returning refugees placed enormous pressure on El Salvador's already strained economy and infrastructure. But here's where the mystery deepens. Declassified documents and investigative journalism from the decades following the war have revealed that both governments may have deliberately inflamed the conflict to distract their populations from domestic problems. El Salvador's military government was facing growing opposition from leftist movements. Honduras was struggling with economic stagnation and social unrest. A short, dramatic war against a foreign enemy was, for both governments, a convenient way to redirect public anger outward. The question of who was really pulling the strings during the football war has never been fully answered. The role of the United States, which had significant economic and military interests in both countries, remains murky. The influence of the United Fruit Company and other multinational corporations, which had enormous power in Central America during this period, has been suggested but never definitively proven. The football war was brief, but its consequences were devastating and long-lasting. It destabilized the Central American common market, exacerbated the social tensions that would eventually erupt into the Salvadoran Civil War, and left thousands of families shattered. And it all supposedly started because of a soccer game. History has a dark sense of humor. Now let me take you somewhere truly haunting. Let's talk about a war that was fought in almost complete silence, a war that the world barely noticed while it was happening, and a war whose full horror only became apparent years after it ended. The Dirty War in Argentina, which lasted from roughly 1976 to 1983, was not a war in the traditional sense. There were no battlefields, no front lines, no armies clashing in open combat. Instead, it was a campaign of state-sponsored terrorism waged by the Argentine military junta against its own citizens. And the mystery at its heart is not what happened, because we know, in broad terms, what happened, but rather the full extent of what happened and how so many people participated in such systematic evil. During the Dirty War, an estimated 30,000 people were disappeared by the military government. They were kidnapped from their homes, their workplaces, their schools, often in broad daylight. They were taken to secret detention centers, where they were tortured, interrogated, and, in most cases, murdered. Many were drugged and thrown from aircraft into the ocean. Their bodies were never recovered. Their families were never notified. They simply ceased to exist. The disappeared included suspected leftists, labor organizers, students, journalists, and human rights activists. But they also included people who had done nothing wrong at all, people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, people who were denounced by neighbors settling personal grudges, people who were simply unlucky. Pregnant women were disappeared, kept alive just long enough to give birth, and then killed. Their babies were given to military families to raise, their identities erased, their true origins hidden. The mystery of the Dirty War lies in its machinery. How did an entire military establishment participate in mass murder and torture without significant dissent? How did ordinary soldiers, many of them young conscripts, carry out acts of unspeakable cruelty against their fellow citizens? How did the broader Argentine society, which must have been aware, on some level, of what was happening, manage to look the other way? The answers to these questions are deeply uncomfortable. Psychological research on obedience, dehumanization, and the diffusion of responsibility helps explain some of it. The Cold War context, with the United States actively supporting anti-communist military governments throughout Latin America, provides some of the geopolitical framework. Operation Condor, a coordinated campaign of political repression by South American dictatorships with CIA backing, connects the Argentine experience to similar horrors in Chile, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay. But understanding the mechanisms doesn't fully resolve the mystery. There is something about the Dirty War, something about the systematic, bureaucratic nature of the killing, something about the way thousands of people were processed through a machinery of death with the cold efficiency of a factory, that resists rational explanation. It forces us to confront a truth about human nature that we'd rather not face, that under the right circumstances, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary evil. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, who marched every Thursday in front of the presidential palace wearing white headscarves and carrying photographs of their missing children, became one of the most powerful symbols of resistance in modern history. They refused to be silent. They refused to forget. And their courage eventually helped bring the junta to justice. But the full truth of the Dirty War has never been completely uncovered. Mass graves continue to be found. DNA testing continues to reunite stolen children with their biological families. And the ghosts of 30,000 disappeared people continue to haunt Argentina's national conscience. Let's pivot now to something ancient and almost impossibly strange. Let's talk about the flower wars of the Aztec Empire. The Aztec Empire, which dominated central Mexico from the 14th to the 16th century, practiced a form of ritualized warfare that has baffled and horrified Western scholars since the Spanish conquest. The Flower Wars, or Zaquiayotl, were prearranged battles fought between the Aztecs and neighboring city-states, most notably Tlaxcala. But unlike conventional wars, the goal of the Flower Wars was not to conquer territory or destroy the enemy. The goal was to capture prisoners for human sacrifice. Both sides would agree in advance to meet at a specific location. Warriors would pair off in individual combat, seeking not to kill their opponents but to subdue and capture them. The captured warriors would then be taken to the victorious city's temples and sacrificed to the gods, their hearts cut from their chests while they were still alive, their blood offered to nourish the sun and ensure the continuation of the cosmic order. The mystery of the Flower Wars operates on multiple levels. First, there's the religious dimension. The Aztecs genuinely believed that the universe was maintained through a cycle of sacrifice and renewal, that the sun god Huitzilopochtli needed the nourishment of human blood to continue his daily journey across the sky. Without sacrifice, the sun would stop. The world would end. From the Aztec perspective, human sacrifice wasn't cruelty. It was cosmic duty. But modern scholars have questioned whether religion was the only motivation for the Flower Wars. Some argue that the wars served a practical military purpose, keeping the Aztec warrior class in fighting shape during peacetime and testing the courage and skill of young soldiers before they faced real combat. Others suggest that the Flower Wars were a form of political control, a way for the Aztec elite to maintain their power by monopolizing access to the gods through sacrifice. Still others have proposed that the Flower Wars were a form of psychological warfare, designed to terrorize neighboring peoples into submission by demonstrating the Aztecs' willingness to engage in ritualized violence on an enormous scale. The most controversial theory, proposed by anthropologist Michael Harner in the 1970s, suggests that the Flower Wars and the associated human sacrifices were driven by protein deficiency. Harner argued that the Aztec diet was low in animal protein and that the consumption of sacrificial victims, which did occur in some contexts, was a way of supplementing the diet of the elite. This theory has been largely rejected by subsequent scholarship, but it illustrates the degree to which the Flower Wars continue to puzzle and provoke researchers. What makes the Flower Wars truly mysterious is the question of why Tlaxcala and the other participating city-states agreed to participate. They were, in effect, sending their own warriors to die on Aztec altars. Why didn't they simply refuse? Some scholars argue that they had no choice, that the Aztec Empire was too powerful to resist. Others suggest that the Tlaxcalans and their allies shared the same religious beliefs and considered participation in the Flower Wars a sacred obligation. Still others propose that the Flower Wars were not the consensual, ritualized affairs that Aztec sources describe, but were rather a euphemism for conventional wars of conquest that the Aztecs reframed in religious terms to legitimize their aggression. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, they were bewildered and horrified by what they encountered. The Tlaxcalans, far from being willing participants in the Flower Wars, eagerly allied with the Spanish against the Aztecs. This alliance was crucial to the Spanish conquest, and it suggests that the Tlaxcalans' participation in the Flower Wars was far less voluntary than Aztec sources implied. The truth about the Flower Wars may lie somewhere in the intersection of religion, politics, military strategy, and cultural psychology. It's a space that defies simple explanation, a space where human behavior at its most extreme and most alien challenges our ability to understand and empathize with people who lived by fundamentally different rules. Let me take you now to a war that happened in almost total darkness, a war fought underground, in tunnels, in conditions so nightmarish that many of the soldiers who survived it never spoke about their experiences. The Tunnel Wars of Siu Chi, fought during the Vietnam War, represent one of the most extraordinary and mysterious chapters in military history. The Siu Chi tunnel system, located about 40 miles northwest of Saigon, was an enormous underground network that stretched for over 150 miles. It included living quarters, hospitals, weapon factories, storage rooms, kitchens, and command centers. Entire communities lived underground for years, emerging only at night. The American military knew the tunnels existed but consistently underestimated their extent and sophistication. Early attempts to destroy the tunnels with conventional explosives failed. The tunnels were designed with multiple levels, false walls, booby-trapped entrances, and ventilation systems that were nearly impossible to detect from the surface. Water traps prevented gas from flowing through the tunnels. Smoke from cooking fires was dispersed through channels that vented far from the kitchen. The Americans eventually created specialized units called tunnel rats, small, lightly armed soldiers who were sent into the tunnels to fight the Viet Cong on their own terms. These soldiers crawled through pitch-black tunnels that were often only 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, armed with nothing more than a pistol and a flashlight. They faced booby traps, scorpions, snakes, and enemy soldiers who knew the tunnels infinitely better than they did. The mortality rate among tunnel rats was appalling. But the mystery of the Siu Chi tunnels goes beyond the military facts. How did the Vietnamese build such an extensive tunnel system under the noses of the most technologically advanced military in the world? Part of the answer lies in the fact that the tunnels weren't built during the American War. The original tunnels dated back to the French colonial period, and the Viet Cong simply expanded and improved them over decades. But the sheer scale of the construction, carried out by hand, in secret, with minimal equipment, remains one of the great engineering feats in military history. There's also the human mystery of what it was like to live underground for months or years at a time. The tunnel dwellers suffered from malaria, intestinal parasites, and vitamin deficiencies. Many developed severe claustrophobia and psychological disorders. The air in the deeper tunnels was thin and stale. The darkness was absolute. And yet, they endured. They fought. Many of them survived. The Siu Chi tunnels force us to confront one of the great recurring mysteries of war, the extraordinary resilience and adaptability of the human spirit under extreme conditions. How much can a person endure? What are the limits of human courage, ingenuity, and determination? The people of Siu Chi pushed those limits further than most of us can imagine. And the fact that they did so in the service of a cause they believed in, however we might judge that cause, is a testament to something fundamental and irreducible about human nature. Let me close with a war that is perhaps the most mysterious of all, because it's a war that we're still fighting, and its contours are only beginning to become visible. The cyber wars of the 21st century represent an entirely new form of conflict, one that operates in a domain that didn't exist a generation ago and that most people still don't fully understand. Nations are attacking each other constantly, every minute of every day, through cyberspace. Critical infrastructure, power grids, water systems, financial networks, military communications, is under constant assault. Elections are being manipulated. Secrets are being stolen. Weapon systems are being compromised. And most of it happens in complete silence. There are no explosions. No casualties that can be counted. No territory that changes hands. The attacks are invisible, deniable, and often undetectable until long after the damage is done. The Stuxnet worm, discovered in 2010, was a joint American-Israeli cyber weapon designed to sabotage Iran's nuclear program by causing centrifuges to spin out of control while displaying normal readings to their operators. It was the first known use of a cyber weapon to cause physical destruction to another country's infrastructure. And it opened a Pandora's box that can never be closed. Since Stuxnet, the cyber battlefield has expanded exponentially. Russia has been accused of attacking Ukraine's power grid, leaving hundreds of thousands of people without electricity in the dead of winter. China has been accused of stealing vast quantities of military and commercial secrets through cyber espionage. North Korea has been linked to ransomware attacks that have crippled hospitals, businesses, and government agencies around the world. But here's the deepest mystery of the cyber wars. We don't know the rules. We don't know the boundaries. We don't even have a clear definition of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace. If a nation-state shuts down another country's power grid in winter, causing deaths among the elderly and the vulnerable, is that an act of war? If a country manipulates another country's elections, undermining the foundations of democracy, is that an act of war? If a cyber attack causes a dam to fail or a nuclear plant to malfunction, is that an act of war? International law, developed over centuries of conventional warfare, provides no clear answers. The Geneva Conventions don't address cyber attacks. The United Nations Charter was written in a world where war meant soldiers and tanks and bombs. The legal and ethical frameworks we use to regulate conflict are obsolete, designed for a world that no longer exists. And so we find ourselves in a war without rules, without boundaries, without even a clear definition of what war means. It's a conflict that's happening all around us, every day, invisible and relentless. And its ultimate consequences are completely unknown. That's the deepest mystery of all. Not a mystery of the past, buried in the sands of Egypt or the jungles of Cambodia, but a mystery of the present, unfolding in real time, shaping the future in ways we can't predict and may not understand until it's too late. Throughout this journey, from the burning of the Cathars to the invisible battlefields of cyberspace, one theme has emerged again and again. War is not what it appears to be. The stated causes are rarely the real causes. The official narratives are rarely the full truth. The heroes are rarely as heroic as we're told, and the villains are rarely as simple as we'd like them to be. The most mysterious wars in history are not mysterious because we lack information. In most cases, we have plenty of information. They're mysterious because the information we have doesn't add up. Because the human motivations that drive people to kill and die in enormous numbers are themselves mysterious, rooted in the darkest and most complex recesses of the human psyche. Because war, in all its forms, is ultimately a mystery of human nature, and human nature is the deepest mystery of all. The next time you read about a conflict in the news, ask yourself, what's really happening here? What aren't they telling us? What will historians, 100 years from now, discover about this war that we can't see right now? Because if history teaches us anything, it's this: the truth about war is always stranger, always darker, and always more mysterious than anyone living through it can possibly imagine. And that should keep you up at night.